and welcome to another episode of Fish for Fallen Light, this semi-regular poetry podcast. Still an experiment in sharing poetry from my friends to you. We are in lockdown still in April of 2020 as I record this. I'm recording this from Washington, D.C., and this experiment was my attempt to create something that could be of use to people in lockdown. And I thought, what better way than to call up friends and have them talk to me about their favorite poems. I've done half a dozen of these, and it's been a great experience to actually be in these conversations with people I know and cherish and admire, and find out about poems that mean something significant to them. We all have favorite writings. I think that sometimes when you revisit those writings, they change. They can actually tell you more over time. Maybe because we change, maybe because our understandings of the poems change. But these conversations have really managed to sort of bring up some great wisdom, the wisdom that we find in great writing. This interview, I should say, was one of the first that I did. It was with an old friend of mine, Gregg Shapiro, a wonderful South Florida poet and writer who is originally from Chicago but moved to South Florida a number of years ago. As you'll see, this was definitely an early one because we still hadn't figured out the video recording function on his side. So what you will be listening to will be Gregg on the phone while I interview him. So you will see my responses. I'm sure that'll be very enjoyable. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. When I mentioned this project to Gregg, he immediately knew which poem he wanted to share. It was an old poem by another wonderful South Florida poet by the name of Denise Duhamel. So, without further ado, let's give a little listen to Gregg. Hi there, Gregg.
Hi there, Dan.
Well, let's hope this works. This is a first try. Thanks for coming on this little podcast experiment with me. How are things in South Florida?
Hot and steamy, and a little slightly overcast.
It is clear and spring-like here in D.C. Anyway, I called up, first of all, just kind of thanks for immediately jumping at this. I spoke to you, was it last week, I guess, about sort of what your favorite poem was or favorite poem, and you immediately had an answer.
Yes, I have more than one, but this is probably so close to number one. It's the one I always think of whenever somebody asks me.
What poem is that?
The poem is The Boy Who Dimmed Light Bulbs by Denise Duhamel.
Denise, yeah. Can you tell me your relationship with the poem? I mean, it's an old poem, right? It was published in her...
Yeah, it was published in her first full-length collection in 1993. The book is Smile, an exclamation point after Smile. It was published by Warm Spring Press, and it's got some great blurbs on the back from Elizabeth Alexander, Edward Field, Colette Inez, Thomas Lux. So that's a pretty impressive lineup.
Did you say Edward Field?
I did.
Wow, that's a name we just don't hear about much anymore. Huh. Wow, amazing. Well, do you want to read the poem to us?
Sure, I would love to. The Boy Who Dimmed Light Bulbs, for Phil. That's the way it started. Split-second brownouts in his kitchen as his mother made him his favorite sandwich, then later a flicker in a neighbor's lamp. He was like Harold and his purple crayon, but backwards, things blackening into nothing when he thought about them. When his friends said that his darkness never came to them, the boy who dimmed the light bulbs realized he was different. He told himself maybe he'd outgrow it in his adolescence, but didn't. A night beyond his curfew, he walked the long way home in Smithtown, each suburban streetlight blinking off as he passed, all becoming part of the background night. No stars the length of Long Island, a velvet-gloved finger, what his shadow would have been like if he had stopped to pause and the Watts had stayed on. His teachers said he had no other choice but to become an artist, so he moved away from home to Manhattan. He sublet an apartment on the Lower East Side, and the radiators started to spit and crackle like the teeny dots of gunpowder sold to kids on red paper strips. A girl on the steps to his building played with them all day, her mission to get at something, to free the small sulfur ghosts. More than envious, sometimes the man who was a boy dimmed light bulbs and didn't know many girls, paused and watched her as she let off her steam. Next, fuses started to blow, and a fire began when he tried to iron a shirt for his waitering job. The city of New York made the landlord of the building he lived in rewire the property, and the boy who grew into a man without outgrowing his tendency to dim light bulbs muttered under his breath that it wasn't his fault. He hadn't painted anything yet, though he still told everyone who asked that he was an artist. His TV split in the middle like it had been hit by lightning, and he was only looking at the TV guide. He went to 4 churches, and the offering candles were instantly snuffed. He went to a nutritionist who said he should stay away from high-energy foods and slowly sip drinks whipped in a blender. Then he went to a shrink who asked about his mother. The man who had dimmed light bulbs, not only as a boy, said maybe. Now as he thought about it, he did have one resentment. He told about those liver sandwiches he only said were his favorites to make his mother happy, but that really made him sick. The shrink said not to separate the boy who dimmed light bulbs from the man who dimmed them still as he reached in his pocket for a cigarette. The shrink asked the boy/man if he minded if he smoked, but didn't wait long enough for an answer before rubbing the tiny wheel of his Bic lighter. Shards of light bulbs fell like slices of snow, and both hot and cold, the Fifth Avenue office went up in flames, then the hall, the elevator, the whole floor. The boy who dimmed light bulbs cleared his throat.
Marvelous. Do you remember when you first read it?
I think I might have first read it when I got the book. I don't think I'd seen it before that. Denise and I have a very long history. We met in the early 1980s in Boston at Emerson College.
Oh, that's right.
And I have the distinction, as Denise likes to tell people, of being the first editor to ever publish her when I was one of the poetry editors at the Emerson Review when I was my last year of college at Emerson. So I've always really liked her work a lot, and this poem has all the things that make me happy about a poem. It's got humor.
Yeah.
It's got pop culture references. Place.
Yeah.
And then there's also something about it, and maybe it's reading it as a gay man, but there's also something very queer about it, like this person, this light bulb dimming person feels very queer, not fitting in, moving to the Lower East Side to become an artist. That feels, and again, maybe it's just my my queer brain, but it feels like it's a poem about somebody who's queer or and definitely an outsider.
An outsider, yeah. Mysterious powers.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Which we must never tell the straight people we have. We must keep that a
secret. Yes, yeah, there is something, it's interesting. I can't remember the line that made me think it was a bit Harry Potter and the Muggles. And certainly,
right.
You know,
I mean,
yeah. What is it? Snuffing out the lights, right? I mean, wasn't that one of
right?
You wonder you wonder if I'm blanking on her name now. If she knew this poem, if she gave
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, if Rowling knew this poem and gave Dumbledore, Dumbledore, that wasn't he the one that had the power to turn off? It was like a lamp turner offer or something. Anyway, that just jumped in my mind.
Right, but I love and the not just the naming of things, Harold and the Purple Crayon and TV Guide, that's the kind of stuff that I really crave when I'm reading about those kinds of things, even if it's stuff that I'm not familiar with, but if it's some kind of a name that I can hang on to, and then
it's the particularity of it, right? I mean, it's kind of a populated world that you're in for the lifespan of the poem, right?
Right, and then Smithtown, Long Island, and the Lower East Side. I mean, it's just great places, really. And then that description that what is the velvet, the thing about Long Island. No stars the length of Long Island, a velvet gloved finger. Again, it's and then she's definitely filled the poem with wonderful images and
the sulfur ghost. I mean, the language is just
right. The little girl reading those. I mean, I can
the velvet gloved finger.
You probably can't even buy those anymore, I doubt. But when we were kids, those were those horrible. They used to call them caps, I think. And initially, I remember them as. And again, because I'm 100 years old, you'd buy the red roll with the dots on them, and you'd put them into this thing that was it looked like a gun.
Right,
it was shaped like a gun, and and the hammer would hit the things, and they would pop, and it was like you're running around the neighborhood shooting this thing off. Of course, now that could get you killed by the police, but it was an awful toy, and then.
I haven't thought about that in a long time, and it had that little sulfur smell, which
right, and they were dangerous too. I mean, this image of the little girl, popping them with a rock, using them on the sidewalk and cracking them,
or a hammer. I remember
you could you could burn yourself.
Yeah.
It's like that Elvira Kurt, the lesbian comedian, the joke about the toys that we were given as kids, lawn darts, is a perfect example of just. Sure. Who thought that was a good idea?
So I'm curious. I mean, one of the things I like about sort of having this conversation with folks about poems is seeing if the poems have changed or your relationship with the poem has changed over time. This is a poem that's now lived with you for,
almost 30 years.
Almost 30 years, yeah. So. Are there ways in which you read the poem differently now than you read them when you were in your 20s?
One of the things too, I'm sort of like a line break junkie, and I love the line breaks here. I love the sort of that there's short lines and longer lines, and the fact that each of the line breaks is a well-earned pause.
Right.
And so that's something I still admire. I mean, I think that now when I look at that poem and I look at Denise's poetry now, what a huge difference. I mean,
sure.
The poems you don't see very many poems, but at least I haven't seen many poems by her lately with short lines. She's more about the long line now, and so in terms of my relationship with this poem, again, it still hits all the buttons. And then in addition to humor, pop culture, place, it hits the line break button too. So no, it still gives me pleasure. It really does.
Nice. Well, thanks for sharing it. Do you have anything to plug?
Gosh.
What are you working on?
Been writing a lot. I have a series of, I have 3 brand new coronavirus poems, which I just both love and hate. And I've got stuff coming out in a few different magazines, Gargoyle and
nice.
A couple of others. And I'm working on a couple of different manuscripts. So.
And you are the author of 3 books of poetry and is that 3?
7 books total.
Right.
3 chapbooks, 1 full-length collection, and 2 books of short stories.
Great.
Does that add up? I think that adds up.
That's
Not so good at math, but anyway, yeah. So.
Hey, well, this has been delightful. Thanks for.
Thank you so very much. I'm honored and privileged to have been able to take part in this. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Take care.
Be safe.
All right. Well, that was enjoyable. I want to thank Gregg Shapiro again for taking part in this little experiment and for offering up that dynamite poem from Denise Duhamel. And thanks to Denise for allowing us to talk about her poem. That conversation, I remember enjoying that interview, but just watching it again reminds me how interesting it was to sort of talk about how the relationship with a poem written by somebody can alter one's experience. Anyway, it was just a really great freewheeling conversation. Hopefully the little pop-ups and images kept focus. Anyway, this is a work in progress, and certainly the learning curve has been high, but it's been a delight for me to work on these as a little offering to you, wherever you are. If you need poetry, hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation and will enjoy conversations to come. If you did, please like and subscribe on YouTube. My understanding is that helps get the word out. And also join the page on Facebook. Both ways will allow you to get alerts about when new episodes are coming out. There's two previous episodes. One was Sheila Black and David Campos, and the most recent one with Lupe Mendez. So check those out if you haven't already. And I'm hoping to get these out every week, maybe 2 a week, certainly during National Poetry Month. I'm going to close the way I close all of these, which is by reciting the very short poem that gave the title to this podcast. Fish for Fallen Light is from the last line in one of the last poems written by the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. And my translation of the poem goes like this. If each day falls inside each night, there exists a well where clarity lies imprisoned. We must sit at the rim of the well of darkness and fish for fallen light with patience. Thanks for joining me. Happy fishing. See you next time.